Forget everything you thought you knew about economic resilience. We're standing on the precipice of something truly terrifying, a financial abyss so deep it threatens to swallow entire states whole. This isn't about a minor downturn or a gentle correction. This is about the kind of systemic collapse that rewrites history, that turns bustling communities into ghost towns and transforms the land of opportunity into a landscape of despair. Imagine the intricate gears of our national economy, already grinding under the weight of debt, inequality, and a myriad of unspoken fragilities. Now picture a colossal wrench thrown into those gears, a full-blown recession, a credit crisis, a global shockwave. The system doesn't just slow down, it shatters. And when it does, the weakest links in the chain won't just snap, they'll disintegrate. We're not talking about abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about the very fabric of society unraveling, thread by painful thread. The lights going out, the store shelves emptying, the security we take for granted vanishing like smoke in the wind. This is the stark reality we must confront. Some parts of this nation are already so precariously balanced, so dependent on a system that is itself on life support, that they are primed for an implosion. They are the canaries in the coal mine, and their desperate chirps are already being drowned out by the roar of the approaching disaster. So brace yourself as we peel back the veneer of normalcy and stare into the heart of the storm. We begin our descent into this grim reality with a state that many picture as a rugged paradise, a land of untamed beauty and boundless resources. But beneath that majestic facade lies a terrifying vulnerability. I'm talking about Alaska. The last frontier, they call it, but it might soon be the first to fall. Alaska's economy isn't just reliant on oil, it's utterly enslaved by it. Think of it as a patient whose only source of sustenance is a single, increasingly unreliable IV drip. When the price of black gold plummets on the world stage, as it inevitably does with sickening regularity, Alaska doesn't just feel a pinch, it suffers a catastrophic hemorrhage. We're talking about a state where a staggering 85% of its general fund revenues are siphoned directly from the oil and gas industry. This isn't a diversified portfolio. It's a high-stakes gamble with the entire state's future. When those oil revenues dry up, it's not a matter of tightening belts. It's a full-blown economic cardiac arrest. Schools shutter, public services evaporate, and the very machinery of government grinds to a halt. Remember the oil price crash between 2015 and 2017? Alaska was staring into a multi-billion-dollar abyss, forced to raid its sacred permanent fund, the savings account meant to secure the future for generations of Alaskans, just to keep the lights on. That fund, once a symbol of foresight, is now looking more like a rapidly depleting emergency slush fund, a desperate measure in an ongoing crisis. And here's the truly chilling part. Even when oil prices are stable, Alaska's oil production has been in a nosedive for decades. The once mighty North Slope is sputtering. So they're not just vulnerable to price shocks. Their golden goose is laying fewer and fewer eggs. It's like watching a critically ill patient whose medicine is both running out and becoming less effective. Add to this the fact that nearly a third of Alaska's GDP comes from government spending, a significant chunk of it federal. If Washington, D.C. ever decides to turn off that spigot, or is forced to, Alaska won't just be cold, it'll be frozen in a state of permanent economic winter. The wild beauty will remain, but it will be a haunting backdrop to a state that simply ceased to function. From the frozen north, our journey into America's economic twilight takes us south, to a land of vibrant culture, unique traditions, and a spirit that has weathered countless storms. But even the most resilient spirit can be broken by the relentless pressure of economic decay. Welcome to Louisiana. Beyond the intoxicating allure of New Orleans jazz, the spicy embrace of its gumbo, and the bacchanalian revelry of Mardi Gras, lies a state perpetually walking a tightrope over a chasm of poverty and dysfunction. Over 18% of its people live below the poverty line. That's nearly 1 in 5 souls trapped in a cycle of want. This isn't just a statistic, it's a gaping wound on the state's conscience, a daily struggle for survival for hundreds of thousands. In too many parishes, the infrastructure isn't just aging, it's actively decomposing. Roads crumble, bridges sag, and the systems meant to support life are themselves on life support. And what's the supposed economic bedrock? Oil and gas again. That same volatile master that holds Alaska hostage has its claws deep in Louisiana too. This makes the state's economy less like a stable enterprise and more like a compulsive gambler, betting the rent money on a rigged game. Every hiccup in the global energy market sends shockwaves through Louisiana, vaporizing jobs and shattering communities. But Louisiana's woes don't end there. It's a state seemingly cursed by nature, a magnet for hurricanes that pummel its coast, floods that inundate its lands, and a grim parade of industrial accidents that scar its environment and its people. Each disaster is another body blow to an already staggering economy, another drain on resources that simply aren't there. And what about the future? With one of the nation's worst-performing public education systems, Louisiana is failing to cultivate the skilled workforce needed to build a resilient tomorrow. The brain drain here is a torrent as young, educated individuals flee the state in search of opportunity, leaving behind a deepening crisis of human capital. If the national economy truly implodes, Louisiana won't just be in trouble. It could become a symbol of utter systemic failure, a place where the music stops, the levees break for good, and the only parades are those of displaced people seeking refuge. FEMA will be overwhelmed, and no amount of Cajun charm or voodoo magic will be able to piece together the shattered remnants. Now let's venture into the heartland, to a state that once symbolized American industrial might, a place where the roar of factories was the soundtrack to prosperity. But the music has changed, replaced by a haunting silence in many communities. We're talking about Michigan. Detroit, the Motor City, often steals the headlines with its narrative of decay and tentative rebirth. But the blight isn't confined to one city. Across the state, the ghosts of manufacturing's golden age linger in boarded-up factories and communities hollowed out by job losses. Michigan was once the engine of the American dream, building the cars that put the nation on wheels and providing a pathway to middle-class security for millions. But that engine has sputtered, and in its wake, nearly 40% of Michigan residents now find themselves in financial distress. That's a staggering number, representing a daily battle against overdue bills, crushing debt, and the gnawing fear of financial ruin. While politicians might tout the emergence of tech hubs in places like Ann Arbor or Grand Rapids, these pockets of prosperity are islands in a sea of economic hardship. For vast swathes of the population in cities like Flint, Saginaw, and Pontiac, the reality is one of crumbling neighborhoods, underfunded schools, shuttered storefronts, and a pervasive sense of abandonment. The terrifying truth is that Michigan's fate remains inextricably linked to the fortunes of the auto industry. Yes, there's been some diversification, but make no mistake, if car sales plummet, if supply chains seize up, if global trade wars escalate, the shockwaves will hit Michigan with the force of a sledgehammer. A bad quarter for one of the major automakers translates almost instantaneously into thousands of layoffs, a surge in home foreclosures, and another wave of despair washing over communities that have already endured so much. There's talk of new manufacturing investments, a potential silver lining from tariff policies, but these are fragile hopes in a state still bearing deep scars from past economic collapses. Michigan isn't just a state trying to recover. It's a patient in critical condition, barely stabilized from the last trauma, and utterly unprepared for the next major shock. When the next Great Recession hits, it won't just be a setback for Michigan. It will be a devastating relapse, a full-blown economic flashback to its darkest days, potentially erasing decades of painful, incremental progress. Our grim tour continues, leading us to a state often at the very bottom of national rankings, a place where poverty is not just a challenge, but a defining characteristic. Prepare to enter Mississippi. This isn't just about being poor by American standards. Mississippi's economic struggles are profound, even when compared to other developed regions globally. The median household income here is a brutal testament to this reality, consistently ranked dead last in the United States. Nearly a quarter of the entire population lives below the poverty line, a figure that climbs to an almost unbelievable 35% in some rural counties. This isn't a temporary downturn. It's a deeply entrenched, multi-generational poverty that has trapped families for decades, with no clear pathway to a better life. The state's labor force participation rate is among the lowest in the nation, meaning a huge segment of its working-age population isn't even in the workforce. This isn't a lifestyle choice. It's a consequence of a barren job market where opportunities are scarce and the available jobs often pay wages so low they can't sustain a family, let alone lift them out of poverty. Then there's the infrastructure, or rather, the alarming lack of it. Roads are crumbling, bridges are decaying, and water systems are failing with terrifying regularity. In some communities, residents are forced to boil their water daily, a grim ritual in a supposedly developed nation. Jackson, the state capital, endured weeks without reliable water service in 2022, a shocking indictment of systemic failure. Schools in poorer counties are literally falling apart, with peeling paint, outdated resources, and an environment that stifles learning rather than nurturing it. And the healthcare crisis? It's a slow-motion catastrophe. Rural hospitals have been closing their doors at an alarming rate, leaving vast areas without access to essential medical care, in a state already plagued by the highest rates of obesity, diabetes, and infant mortality. It's a perfect storm of neglect and despair. Compounding all this is the chronic brain drain. Young people who manage against all odds to get an education see no future in Mississippi. They leave at the first opportunity, taking their talent, energy, and potential with them. The Magnolia State simply lacks the industries and incentives to retain its brightest minds, leading to an aging population and a shrinking tax base. Economic development initiatives are often token gestures, and foreign investment is virtually non-existent. Mississippi's economy limps along, propped up by agriculture, low-wage manufacturing, and a heavy reliance on federal aid. So what happens when the national economy crashes and that federal lifeline frays or snaps? Mississippi wouldn't just struggle. It would likely face a complete and utter collapse, a humanitarian crisis unfolding in the heart of America. It's already teetering on the edge. A national disaster would surely push it over. From the Deep South, we journey northward, to a state that boasts a world-class city and a facade of prosperity. But beneath the gleaming skyscrapers and bustling commerce lies a fiscal black hole of staggering proportions. We're talking about Illinois. On the surface, Illinois, particularly the Chicago metropolitan area, appears to be an economic powerhouse, a hub for global corporations, innovative tech startups, and a vibrant cultural scene. But this glittering exterior masks a terrifying secret. Illinois is drowning in debt, primarily due to one of the most catastrophically underfunded public pension systems in the entire United States. We're talking about unfunded liabilities exceeding $211 billion. That's not a misprint. It's a fiscal time bomb ticking relentlessly towards detonation. To even attempt to stay afloat, the state has been forced to impose crushing tax burdens on its residents. Property taxes are among the highest in the nation, squeezing homeowners and businesses alike. And what do the people of Illinois get in return for these exorbitant taxes? Crumbling roads, an aging and often unreliable public transit system, underfunded schools, and a state government perpetually lurching from one budget crisis to the next. It's a classic case of paying champagne prices for flat beer. It's no wonder, then, that Illinois has been experiencing a mass exodus of its population for a decade straight. U-Hauls stream out of the state as if an evacuation order has been given. People are voting with their feet, fleeing the crippling taxes, the declining services, and in some areas, like parts of Chicago, a level of violent crime that makes daily life a harrowing ordeal. While Chicago remains an economic engine for the Midwest, it too carries debt levels that would make a small nation blush. The city's own pension crisis mirrors the state's, and its public services are stretched to the breaking point. If the national economy takes a nosedive, Illinois won't just feel the impact. It will become a poster child for fiscal irresponsibility and systemic collapse. Imagine a state already struggling desperately to keep its head above water as a tidal wave approaches. That's Illinois. This isn't just about a few cracks in the foundation. It's about a full-blown structural failure, a disaster waiting for the inevitable trigger. The ensuing chaos would be biblical, with public services grinding to a halt and the state government potentially facing insolvency. Now let's turn our attention to a state that often flies under the national radar, a place whose quiet demeanor belies a deep-seated economic fragility. Welcome to Arkansas. You might not hear much about Arkansas in the nightly news, and in many ways, that's part of the problem. Its struggles are often overlooked, its vulnerabilities underestimated. While the northwest corner of the state has seen some impressive growth with thriving industries and pleasant towns, this localized prosperity is an anomaly. It does little to offset the deep-seated problems plaguing the rest of Arkansas. Nearly 18% of Arkansans live in poverty, and vast swathes of the state remain rural, disconnected, and economically underdeveloped. Access to quality health care is a significant challenge, particularly in these outlying areas. Educational outcomes consistently rank among the worst in the nation, hobbling the state's ability to build a competitive workforce for the future. Basic infrastructure, like reliable broadband internet, is still a luxury, not a given, further isolating communities and hindering economic development. The state's workforce is heavily concentrated in low-wage sectors such as agriculture, retail, and older forms of manufacturing, industries that are notoriously vulnerable to economic shocks and offer little in the way of upward mobility. Furthermore, Arkansas is heavily reliant on federal funding to prop up its budget and provide essential services. This dependency becomes a critical vulnerability when the national economy falters and Uncle Sam is forced to tighten the purse strings. In many parts of Arkansas, entire county budgets and community programs are precariously dependent on this federal largesse. If that money dries up, the consequences would be immediate and devastating. Combine this fiscal dependency with crumbling infrastructure, chronically underfunded public services, and a healthcare system that is perpetually stretched thin, and you have a state that is dangerously unprepared for a major economic downturn. Don't let the peaceful small-town vibe fool you. Arkansas is standing on shaky ground, and the next national recession could expose the full extent of its fragility, potentially triggering a rapid and painful collapse from which recovery would be a monumental task. Our journey into the heart of America's economic vulnerabilities now takes us to a state synonymous with bright lights, high rollers, and the seductive allure of instant fortune. But behind the dazzling facade of Las Vegas lies an economy built on a foundation as unstable as a house of cards in a hurricane. We're talking about Nevada. The neon glow of the Las Vegas Strip might project an image of boundless prosperity, but Nevada's economy is a one-trick pony, dangerously dependent on the whims of tourism, gambling, and entertainment. Over a quarter of the state's entire workforce is employed in the hospitality and leisure sector. This means that when discretionary spending dries up, when people stop traveling and gambling, as they inevitably do during a severe recession, Nevada's economic engine doesn't just sputter, it seizes up completely. The state famously has no income tax, which sounds appealing until you realize the catastrophic consequences during an economic downturn. When the casinos are empty and the tourists stay home, state revenues plummet, leaving a massive hole in the budget for essential services like schools, hospitals, and public safety. Nevada learned this lesson the hard way during the 2008 housing crash, which hit the state with brutal force, leading to record foreclosures and widespread unemployment. While Nevada might be experiencing a period of relative prosperity now, this boom is built on the same precarious foundation. When the next major economic downturn arrives, expect to see a chilling repeat of the past, only potentially worse. Picture ghost town casinos, darkened marquees, and an economy that has hit the anti-jackpot. While government employment provides some ballast, it's not nearly enough to offset the collapse of its primary industry. And with the federal workforce itself facing potential cuts, even that cushion is looking increasingly thin. Nevada's glittering dream can very quickly turn into a desolate nightmare, a stark reminder that what goes up in a speculative frenzy often comes crashing down with devastating consequences. The state is perpetually one bad roll of the dice away from economic ruin. Next, we venture into a state known for its rolling hills, its bourbon, and its thoroughbreds, a place that often embodies a quiet, unassuming character. But beneath this tranquil surface, Kentucky is grappling with a host of economic demons that threaten to drag it into the abyss. Much like its neighbors Missouri and Arkansas, Kentucky's problems don't always make the national headlines, but they are pervasive and deeply rooted. We're talking about vanishing jobs, particularly in its traditional industries like coal, collapsing infrastructure that struggles to support its communities, and a population that is increasingly reliant on federal aid just to make ends meet. Rural hospitals are shutting down at an alarming rate, creating healthcare wastelands where access to even basic medical services is a desperate struggle. Schools, especially in poorer counties, are chronically underfunded, starved of the resources needed to provide a quality education and give the next generation a fighting chance. The promise of tech and innovation, the supposed saviors of the modern economy, remains largely an urban legend in much of Kentucky. Nearly 22% of its residents live in poverty, and many communities haven't seen significant new industry or job growth since the decline of their legacy industries decades ago. It's as if time has stood still while the rest of the world moved on. And then there's the opioid crisis. This epidemic didn't just hit Kentucky, it tore through it like a wildfire, leaving a trail of shattered lives, devastated families, and overwhelmed social services. Some rural counties have overdose rates that are tragically among the highest in the developed world. When hospitals close and mental health resources evaporate, what's left is a population struggling to cope with unimaginable trauma, often with little to no support. So what happens when the national economy crashes? For Kentucky, it's not a question of wobbling. It's a question of an outright faceplant. The federal money that props up so much of the state's fragile ecosystem will begin to vanish. Any slow, hard-earned progress made over the years in combating poverty or improving services could be wiped out in an instant. Kentucky has been hanging on to its progress by the thinnest of threads, and a severe recession could be the event that finally snaps that thread, plunging the state into a desperate fight for survival. Our penultimate stop on this grim tour takes us to a state in the heart of the Deep South, a place with a rich history and a fierce sense of pride, but one whose economic foundations are alarmingly weak. We arrive in Alabama. Alabama is a state of undeniable grit and resilience, but pride and determination alone cannot solve deep-seated economic problems. The state consistently ranks near the bottom of national metrics for everything from healthcare access and quality to educational attainment and broadband internet availability. When the national economy catches a cold, Alabama doesn't just get the sniffles. It risks developing full-blown pneumonia. Over 16% of Alabamians live in poverty, a stark figure that underscores the daily struggles faced by a significant portion of its population. Rural infrastructure is crumbling, a silent testament to years of underinvestment and neglect. Many jobs across the state still pay wages that would have been modest in the 1990s, let alone adequate for the economic realities of the 2020s. This creates a situation where even full-time work isn't enough to escape the clutches of poverty. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Alabama's situation is the incredibly thin margin for error. The state's social safety nets are frayed and inadequate. Its economy lacks diversification, making it highly vulnerable to downturns in specific sectors. And, like many other states on this list, federal aid plays an enormous role in keeping essential services afloat, from healthcare programs to infrastructure projects. This means that when the national economy begins to wobble and federal funds become scarce, Alabama will find itself in an incredibly precarious position. The state has resilience, there's no doubt about that, but resilience without resources is simply a recipe for prolonged suffering. The next time the American economy takes a significant dive, Alabama may not have the cushion, the cash, or the economic diversity to bounce back, potentially facing decades of hardship and a painful struggle to rebuild. And now, we arrive at the precipice, the #1 state on this horrifying countdown, a place that serves as a chilling omen for the rest of the nation. This is the canary in America's economic coal mine, and its song is one of utter despair. We are talking about West Virginia. The metaphor isn't just poetic, it's painfully literal. West Virginia is, or rather was, coal country. And when the coal industry, the lifeblood of the state for generations, collapsed under the weight of changing energy markets and environmental concerns, it took a massive chunk of West Virginia's economy down with it. The devastating problem is that nothing ever truly came to replace it. There was no tech boom to absorb the displaced workers, No significant diversification of the job market, no new booming industry to offer a lifeline. What remains is a landscape scarred by economic desolation, boarded-up storefronts, abandoned homes, and for sale signs that have been gathering dust for over a decade, grim monuments to a bygone era of prosperity. The statistics paint a brutal, unflinching picture of this decline. West Virginia has the lowest workforce participation rate in the entire country. Let that sink in. Nearly half of its working-age population is not working, nor are they even actively looking for work. This isn't a labor shortage, it's a full-blown economic coma, a state of suspended animation from which recovery seems almost impossible. Then there's the health crisis, which is nothing short of catastrophic. West Virginia suffers from the highest drug overdose death rate in the nation, a tragic consequence of economic despair and the opioid epidemic. It also has some of the worst outcomes for chronic diseases like heart disease, obesity, and diabetes. Compounding this tragedy is the severely limited access to medical care, especially in its many rural, isolated communities, where hospitals are disappearing at an alarming rate, vanishing like blockbuster video stores in the age of streaming. Education, the supposed pathway to a better future, is also in dire straits. Schools are chronically underfunded and perpetually short-staffed. One might morbidly joke they're considering a return to clay tablets and abacuses, but the reality is a grim struggle to prepare the next generation for anything beyond basic survival, let alone participation in a modern economy. And let's not forget the crumbling infrastructure. Even basic necessities like reliable running water, consistent internet access, and roads that are actually functional are not a given in large swaths of this state. The cherry on top of this mountain of misery, nearly 1/3 of West Virginia's entire state budget is cobbled together from federal aid. So what happens if a national recession hits with full force and the federal government is forced to drastically tighten its purse strings? The entire fragile structure could come crashing down with terrifying speed. Schools, hospitals, public safety. Virtually every essential service is at risk. There is no substantial emergency fund, no viable economic plan B, just a desperate hope and the deafening silence where a vibrant industry once thrived. The coal industry, its former backbone, has been in decline for over a quarter of a century in the U.S. While other nations may be ramping up coal consumption, they have their own minds and are unlikely to turn to American imports, especially given current geopolitical tensions. You desperately hope for a miracle for West Virginia, a state filled with good, hard-working people, trapped in an economic death spiral. But hope is not a strategy. West Virginia isn't just at risk of a recession, it's already living in a slow-motion collapse. It's like watching a condemned building crumble piece by piece in agonizing slow motion. Everyone can see it happening, but no one seems to have the power or the plan to stop it. And when the U.S. economy finally smashes into that next big wall, West Virginia will undoubtedly be the first to feel the full, devastating impact, and it may tragically never ever bounce back. The struggle has been decades in the making, and a national recession would be the final fatal blow. And so, we've stared into the abyss, a harrowing tour of 10 U.S. states balanced precariously on the razor's edge of economic oblivion. If a significant downturn materializes, and the signs are indeed ominous, many of these communities, already gasping for air, may never recover. Each state carries its own unique burdens, its own tragic narrative of decline, but the common threads are undeniable. Skyrocketing poverty levels that mock the very idea of an American dream, infrastructure so decayed it crumbles before our eyes, the relentless vanishing of decent jobs, and a terrifying, all-consuming dependence on fragile economic systems and dwindling federal handouts. Some of these places were once titans of industry, vibrant cultural hubs, symbols of American strength and ingenuity. Now they are ghosts of their former selves, hanging on by the thinnest of threads, their futures shrouded in an ever-darkening fog of uncertainty. The ultimate, terrifying question then becomes, is your state next on this grim list? Are you, in your own community, your own backyard, truly paying attention to the subtle and not-so-subtle warning signs? The cracks in the pavement, the shuttered businesses, the hushed conversations about layoffs, the growing lines at food banks. These are not isolated incidents. They are tremors before the earthquake. If this journey into the potential collapse has been an eye-opener, if it has shaken you from complacency, then don't just stand idly by. Share this warning, spread this awareness, and alert others to even more economic concerns found in this next video.